Hello, everybody. My name is Professor Jonathan Rynhold, and I'm the head of department at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. And I'm here today to talk to one of our lecturers, Elai Rettig, who's going to talk to us about the international politics of energy with regard to the sanctions that are currently being put on the Russian regime. So I'm going to let Elai introduce himself, and then I'm going to ask him a few questions, and we'll take it from there. Elai.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Elai Rettig. I teach at the Department of Political Studies here at Bar-Ilan, and my research deals with energy politics, energy governance, the politics of oil and gas, and policies to move towards renewable energy.
Great. So Elai, perhaps we could start with you just explaining what actually is going on. What are the sanctions that are put on Russia? And what are the exceptions, and whether you think that this can actually work and have an impact on Russian policy to the Ukraine?
So far, as we speak today, right, March 14, 2022, the sanctions on energy are pretty mute, which is surprising considering that energy is the main source of Russian exports. It's about half of all Russian exports is oil and gas. But the sanctions on oil and gas are kind of the least harsh so far. That's surprising unless you know the dynamics of energy, because when we sanction energy countries, we are paying a price, and it's usually a very high price during times where oil and gas prices are already high. So far we've seen pretty mute responses. US and the UK announced that they won't buy Russian oil. The US starting from April, the UK only from 2023. But they've only said that they won't buy Russian oil. It's kind of a self-sanction. They're not preventing Russia from selling oil to China or to India or to other customers. And so it's creating a rise in oil prices, but enriching Russia in the short term. Although China and India probably will ask for a discount, you're still not really preventing Russia from selling oil, because it's a pretty hard commodity to block at this point of time. Gas, we've seen European announcements that they will try to decouple from Russian gas. Germany has said that it would postpone the beginning of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Again, Europe has been saying this since 2006 and has only become more dependent on Russian gas. It's easier said than done. Right now, it can say it, but when winter comes and gas is used for electricity and heating in the winter, Europe is going to be in a problem. There are solutions, but it's going to take a few years to do it. So we're in a problem. It's important to distinguish between oil and gas. These are two different commodities and two very different dynamics, both in how you transport them and in what they're used for. So gas, it's mainly for electricity and heating in Europe. And so you can switch to coal, you can switch to nuclear, even to renewable energy. It's going to take time. It's going to take a few years to do that, but that's technically feasible. With oil, oil is not used for electricity. Oil is used for transportation and petrochemicals, and we don't have anything to replace that anytime soon. Might be in the future hydrogen, but right now it's just a commodity we can't live without. And in the past year, high oil prices have kind of dominated the market. Developed countries don't like to sanction oil countries when oil prices are high because they don't have anywhere else to get the oil from. Since 2014, oil prices have been very, very low because of the shale revolution in the US and all of the fracking and oil coming from. And because oil prices were low in the past 8 years, energy companies have not been looking for new oil. And the fracking companies that created this revolution, a lot of them went bankrupt. And so the supply of oil went down. And when there's a lot of oil in the market and the prices are cheap, we're also kind of invigorated to sanction oil countries like Iran, like Venezuela. And what happened was supply went down and down. And in the past year, because of COVID kind of ending, the demand suddenly shot up and we got into a tight oil market. When you have a tight oil market, when supply and demand is really thin, the margin between them, you really don't want to sanction oil countries. And so Russia has an advantage, it's kind of invigorated to do what it did because it assumed no one will actually sanction it right now. And so the sanctions we're seeing right now are kind of self-sanctions. I'm not going to buy oil, but you can still sell oil because we don't have anywhere else. Now, if Europe is serious about this and really doesn't want to buy Russian oil, it's going to need to get that oil from somewhere because there's no replacement right now for the things that oil brings us. And this means probably oil from Iran and Venezuela. They will have to kind of reduce the sanctions on these countries before they got what they wanted from these countries and get the oil from there, because it seems like OPEC can't really meet all of the margin or the oil that's missing. Either it doesn't want to or it can't, we still don't know.
So I'd like to ask you about that. There's been some talk of America trying to pressure Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to supply more oil. Is that theoretically possible? And in your opinion, would that make a difference? And I would like to add to that, if indeed in the short run, you're suggesting that it's not really possible for Europe to break its dependence on Russian energy, what could be done and how long would it take?
So it's not rare for the US to go to Saudi Arabia and ask it to pump up production. The US did that before the sanctions on Iran. Europe did that when when the whole NATO operation on Libya. It's pretty common, and Saudi Arabia has kept this kind of swing capacity ability where it technically produces 10 million barrels of oil every day, but it can, on a flip of a switch, produce 11.5 million, and it doesn't, and it loses a lot of money by not doing it because it wants to have that ability that developed countries come knocking on its doors every time we need to up the production. So the US often does this. However, this time it seems like OPEC, mainly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, aren't really complying. It could be two reasons. One could be political. One, perhaps this presidency isn't as influential on them as the previous administration. Perhaps they want to sit and wait. There's no point in kind of pumping up production before the situation with Russia and Ukraine subsides, because all of the speculative marketing, the oil price will still remain high. And the other option is that it might just be technical. It could be that Saudi Arabia and the UAE can't currently ramp up their production due to technical issues. Perhaps they're already at capacity. That's a state secret in a lot of Gulf countries, how much reserves they have, what is the condition of their reserves and production. It might be a technical malfunction and they might try to, it might come up later, but it still won't replace 10% of the oil market, which is what Russia provides. Russia provides 8 million barrels. That won't compensate for this. So you're still gonna need oil from Libya, oil from Iran, oil from Venezuela, oil from Sudan, countries that so far we kind of didn't like to buy oil from. And so that's a problem. Now, in terms of the gas and whether Europe can escape Russian gas, technically they can. It's going to be expensive. They can switch to they can stop closing down the nuclear power plants, and they can build more. They can stop closing down coal plants, and they'll build more. They can even go towards renewables more, and that can replace the electricity that gas has provided. It won't replace the heating that fast. So still during the winter, they're going to need a lot of gas. But it's possible. They can also build pipelines to Israel, etc. All of these things are going to take time. You can't do this in a year. You can't do this even in 3 years. It's going to take 5, 7, sometimes even 10 years. And then the question is, are you willing to pay the price now for something that will come online in 5 years if there might not be any sanctions on Russia in 5 years, and you kind of just put a lot of money here. The key word, I think, or maybe the key question is not whether Europe can do it, whether Europe wants to do it. Because Europe is not a country. And we keep seeing in the news that Europe is dependent on 40% of its gas on Russian gas. Europe is not a thing. East Europe is dependent on 80 to 100% of its gas on Russia. West Europe, almost not at all, doesn't depend on Russia at all. And the center of Europe is somewhere between 30 to 70%. So overall, it's 40%. But this difference kind of makes Europe, when I say the European Union needs to pay for new pipelines or etc., the European Union is mainly the west of Europe. That's where the money comes from. And they don't want to put the money into it. They're taking care of themselves. So we're talking about, for example, that Europe will import more liquefied natural gas from the US and other places. Europe doesn't have the capacity to replace all of Russian oil with LNG. Most of the gasification facilities, the facilities that take the LNG and turn it back into gas, they're in West Europe. Most of them are in Spain and UK, and you can't bring that gas into East Europe physically. So West Europe will be fine. East Europe, they're landlocked and they have a problem, and they're not going to be able to switch from gas anytime soon unless the European Union pays for it. Question is, will they pay for it?
Great. And my final question, seeing as we are in Israel, is how does all this affect Israel's energy sector and the prospects for Israel exporting more gas?
So there's good news and bad news. The good news, depending on who you are, right? If you're in environmental, not so much. But when oil and gas prices are high, then it motivates energy companies to come back and look. So far, Israel had a bunch of tenders to sell more drilling licenses, and they failed. No one wants to come and look for more gas because there's no one to sell the gas that we're already found to. So high oil and gas prices might bring more drilling into Israel, maybe even find more gas, because the assumption is it will invigorate gas exports. So far, this kind of ambitious ideas of building pipelines from Israel to Europe economically didn't make sense with the gas prices that Europe has been having since 2014. Now, it could make sense. But when you make an investment decision on a gas field, on building a pipeline, you need to know, or at least assess, you can't know, what the gas prices are, not now, but in 5 years from now when the pipeline will actually be built. And the question is this crisis just temporary, or in 5 years, will you still be needing this pipeline? And so far, private investors need to wait and see to see if this is going to continue towards next winter. If next winter's prices are still going to remain high, then we have further kind of possibilities of exporting gas. In terms of oil, it might, there are a bunch of things. So oil prices are high and Israel will have to pay higher prices for oil. That means higher gasoline prices in Israel, higher electricity prices for the gas, etc. Although the gas is still the same price, so we're kind of good in that sense. But it could interrupt Israel's oil imports. Most of our oil comes from the post-Soviet area. A lot of it comes from Russia. So if sanctions kind of expand, that can create a problem. We'll need to get oil from somewhere else, and that will cost us money. It might invigorate or invigorate the UAE Qatar pipeline deal, right? If Europe doesn't want oil from Russia, it will have to get it mainly from the Gulf. And that means more oil, usually most of the oil from the Gulf goes to China and East Asia. More of it is now going to go to Europe, and that is going to go through the Suez Canal. And they're probably going to want to use our pipeline as well, the Qatar pipeline that creates a bridge and is cheaper than the Suez Canal sometimes. That's good and bad. One of the things that another thing politically that will affect Israel is if Iran is going to escape sanctions, then that's a problem for Israel. Because usually when high oil prices dominate the market, oil exporting countries become kind of more adventurous in their foreign policy under the assumption that no one will dare sanction them. And that might mean that Iran will kind of be a little more adventurous in our region in the next year, and that might create challenges for us. But that's beyond the energy scope. So I'll leave that to the other experts in the department.
Thank you very much, Elai. I think that anyone who watches this video will now be in a better position to decide what to do with their millions that they want to invest. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bye.